I guess we can get started. Cool. Well, thank you everyone for joining. So my name is Andrew. You can see our names on screen. I guess each of us is having a brief introduction so you know who we are and why we're here. I am originally Italian, but I come from Ireland, and that's where I am based with my company ClearUp. It's a digital consulting company, meaning that we support businesses, individuals to run a variety of digital projects. And one thing that I'm definitely interested in is ethics, and I believe, just like anyone else in this room probably, that ethics is really important for all of digital problems that we're tackling with technology, digital and non-digital. And I help clients with making ethical choices when they develop products or run different data analysis projects, etc. So the format for this is not really a presentation, it's more of a panel. So what we hope to get is a conversation between ourselves and the audience to explore digital ethics, and then specifically problems related to artificial intelligence, and trying to touch on points that are closely related to artificial intelligence in Fintech or InsurTech, so on point, not general conversations. I don't know, before we get started, if you want to get a brief introduction.
I think Nikita has to start.
Sure. Just by way of very brief introduction, my name is Nikita Agarwal. I'm a lawyer and researcher at the University of Oxford, at the Faculty of Law and Oxford Internet Institute, and my research covers a range of topics within law and technology, and I'm particularly interested in regulation around machine learning systems.
So I'm the Vice President for Europe for UiPath. UiPath is the worldwide leader in robotics, process automation, and artificial intelligence. I'm managing from here 30 countries, and in terms of all the partner operations, 130 countries actually, and we are based in Istanbul. UiPath is actually like close to 14 years old company, but we say actually we are like 3 years old because until last 3 years ago we were only 10 people, and now we became 2,500 people. Actually, the business was getting developed and the technology was getting developed all through the first 10 years.
Brilliant. Well, thank you both. We thought we would get started with what is it that we're talking about? Artificial intelligence, ethics, what does that mean? So that we kind of define it together, and then we can talk a bit more about specifics from Nikita's research, from my consulting, from UiPath, the businesses. So because this is a panel and we're lucky enough that this is a small room, we can probably interact a bit more than what would normally happen. So I have a question for you actually. What is AI? What is artificial intelligence? Anyone wants to chip in? We can hear you without the mic. No? What is artificial intelligence? Or what it isn't?
Anything that is not natural.
Anything is not natural. Anything is not natural. So we're down on the artificial part. Well, we already have some issues in defining what is natural and what not, but we have that part covered. Any guess? Artificial intelligence? Okay, there's a big hype around artificial intelligence, and it is a field in computer science that actually started in the 50s. And in the 70s, funnily enough, there were already talks that were very similar to 2019. Artificial intelligence is a recent technology. It's developing, it has a lot of opportunities. We're starting to see commercial implementation, and this was people talking in the 70s in a field that started 20 years earlier. So what is happening today? And what is this artificial intelligence thing? It's interesting. I'll share a small experience with you. I come from big tech corporation backgrounds, IBM, Google, LinkedIn, and Microsoft. So before I started my own company, I had that kind of experience. One of my fellow Googlers, so engineer and great friend of mine, he used to talk to me in this way. I was telling him, we're going to a party tonight, and he will look at me and go, expand. And I will tell him something else, and he didn't know what that was, and he looks at me and he goes, define. And I realized that he was talking more like a computer than a human being to me. I was like, what? Okay. So I don't know if you're familiar with the Turing Test, so the imitation game, right? So having a computer imitating a machine, and this was years and years ago, but I had the first time, for the first time, the feeling that we can win that game by having machines reasoning like ourselves, or having us reasoning like machines. Because if somebody talks to me like define or expand, it looks a lot more like the way you would interact with a computer than you would interact with a person. So the artificial intelligence, back to the problem. What is artificial intelligence? Is essentially a working definition of artificial intelligence given by the founders of this branch of research and computer science, so back in the 50s, will be making a machine behave essentially in a way that if a human being was behaving that way, it would be deemed intelligent. It would be showing intelligence. We can talk for hours about what is intelligence, what it isn't. So there's a paper actually from the University of Oxford that was saying, if I have a dishwasher, this is Luciano, right? I have a dishwasher, and that dishwasher will wash dishes like I do, or even better, and it's intelligent enough to perform this task. It's a complex task of washing dishes, but does that really mean that that machine thinks? Does that really mean that it is intelligent? So there's a lot of conversations around this simple definition of what artificial intelligence will be, making a machine behave in a way that will be deemed intelligent. And Turing already started this line of thinking. Machines think. It's just that it might not be our way of thinking. So the problem is not defining whether or not the machine is intelligent. The judgment is on the output. And the output looks like an intelligent output, an output performed by a person behaving with intelligence. And it becomes a much easier, if you will, problem to perhaps understand. So there's a lot of talks around artificial intelligence as in robot wars and Terminator-like scenario. But the reality is that that is what would be called the super intelligent general AI. But what we have today, we're far from there. What we have today is narrow, specific AI agents, AI services. So AI is really recommending you the next movie to watch on Netflix, or the next product that you might want to buy on Amazon. It's embedded in our life, we're getting there. We're solving problems with artificial intelligence. But what happens when the decision is not the movie to watch, but is, should I approve this mortgage or not? Or what's the credit score for this person? What will be the insurance premium that this person will have to pay on a health insurance? Very different problems, which might lead to bias, which might lead to choices that impact people. So it requires ethical interventions. When a machine is thinking intelligently, or we believe it is thinking intelligently and helping us solve problems, such as driving a car, what would machine do? How can we make sure that we develop and embed ethics that would remove bias, that would help supporting the right decisions? So when it comes to ethics, we thought we'd quickly define what ethics is as well. So the study of principles related to right or wrong conduct. The self-driving machine has to avoid one person, perhaps killing another. And there's no way out of this scenario. How would that machine perform? What would the car do? What is the right or wrong thing to do? Which are gradually more realistic scenarios and closer to us. We're already in a world where credit score can be analyzed by AIs. We will soon be in a world where there will be self-driving cars on the road. We're probably very far, if we will ever get there, hopefully not, from the Skynet Terminator scenario, right? So today we wanted to discuss these topics and perhaps deep dive a bit in some of our research. So what I've been working on is applied ethics. So essentially taking frameworks from philosophers, from studies of ethics, and apply them to helping businesses driving ethical decisions when they develop their products, or they develop AI and whatnot. We have already come to the definition that today it's not a general superintelligence. So we're looking at realistic problems that happen today, such as approving a mortgage, not the sci-fi scenarios, which may or may not ever happen. We don't think it will. So perhaps Nikita and Tansu, you might want to share some of your experiences. Nikita, you might have in your research some examples that are fintech related. So we'll start from there and then go a bit into how the businesses are receiving these ethical principles. Perhaps Tansu, you have more thoughts on that topic, being UiPath, a major AI company. So if you want to talk to us a bit about your research and fintech examples of this.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Angela. That was a really comprehensive introduction. So to kind of make this a bit concrete for financial services and what we call fintech, I think there are lots of applications of AI technology, but basically what we're talking about is using data to make better predictions and therefore augment decision-making processes, and that can be applied in various products and various services. And in my own research, I've been taking quite a close look at credit scoring or consumer credit decision making. But the considerations, the ethics, the legal issues that come up kind of cut across and can be applied in other sort of product or service categories. But to focus on credit scoring, I think one of the sort of big legal and ethical issues is that you have both benefits, and this is going to sound very sort of general and kind of vague, but you have both benefits and disadvantages from this technology. Like on the one hand, by having more data on the consumer, you improve the observability and you kind of, in many ways, sort of ameliorate the information asymmetry that could otherwise produce some kind of market failure. So you have more information on the consumer to help you identify their credit risk, to therefore price the credit, and actually you have a better ability to predict the affordability of credit, which what we saw from the previous crisis, partly the problem was overextending, but partly the problem is also to not be able to know what a consumer's other expenditure looks like and how affordable this lending would be for them. And so if we can improve that, and if we can make credit pricing more accurate, you actually improve the functioning of the market. The flip side is that by having so much data, you give the seller, or in this case the lender, a lot of power over you. They have a lot of information over you, and we don't know that that information is only used to your advantage. For example, we could think of that data being sold or just accessed by malicious actors and used to your disadvantage. So is it going to be used to target ads to you based on your browsing patterns that aren't actually in your interest? And so those are kind of the trade-offs that we're looking at when we talk about, well, yes, data and therefore the sort of advances in AI will be very beneficial from, for example, improving the accuracy of a credit score, but on the other hand, will this data be used against us in kind of less obvious ways, in ways that can't necessarily be detected? So I kind of think of that as the main kind of dichotomy, or the sort of the big trade-offs that we're thinking about. And from an ethical perspective, we might want to then ask ourselves, well, should certain types of data not be allowed to be used? Like, so should it be banned for banks to use your Facebook data or your Google browsing patterns, because that's just too much personal information and that the risks are too great? And then if we are going to sort of put the limit somewhere, where do we draw that line? And for me, that's the big ethical conundrum. I'll stop there kind of as an introduction and as by way of example, and we can continue the discussion.
Discussion there, absolutely. And when we go back to the applied ethics that I was mentioning before, one of the principles and frameworks will be around utilitarianism. So what is useful and what is not for the individual, for the common good, for the benefits of others. So you will start conversations on who are the stakeholders, who are the people involved, financial institutions, somebody that needs, a private citizen that needs to get a mortgage approved, and you start thinking, this information, who does that belong to, what is useful for, and who benefits from this? And if we have a disadvantage for a certain organization or person, how would that be balanced with greater good for others? So these are all ethical questions to be included in the design. One way to do this is having companies incorporating these ethical conversations as they develop things. Another way is to have governance, so legislation, regulation. So for those that did not, for lack of knowledge or experience, for lack of interest, for a misperception on how important this might be, for those that did not incorporate those values or those ways of thinking, the law might come at hand. But ethics is not legal, it's not the law. It's a way to enforce certain principles, and perhaps we can look at it positively as a way to enable organizations to get there when they didn't do it on their own, because it is important for the common good to do this.
I think I'd just add one thing, which is that it's not that ethics is not law. I mean, there are different ways of approaching ethics, right? And you could do it in a kind of voluntary, self-regulatory way. So companies or communities have different social values and they self-enforce them. Or you might adopt a code of conduct, and there might be an industry organization that helps regulate, but there's no real penalty for breach. But really what law is supposed to be doing is embodying and coding social norms and basically the ethical values of a society. So there might be a mismatch because legal processes move too slowly, but the reality is that the laws, at least the way I interpret law, should be a manifestation of the values and the ethical values that a society holds.
Absolutely, and that would be the idea, as in legal is not necessarily ethical, ethical is not necessarily legal, but the law can be utilized to promote and enforce agreed ethical values and ways of thinking, because we have society in mind, not private actors. There's an example how this is important. We know that it's essential to AI development, the governance, the values, the corporate mission. It is essential because we know that artificial intelligence can bring great advantages and can have risks associated with that are probably equally great. We saw recently lots of employee protesting AI utilization in the defense industry with companies like Google that changed ethical conducts and policies and created ethical committees. Google is now relying on an external third-party ethical committee to support AI development decisions, and University of Oxford is actually part of that. So to answer your experience, given that for any employee, for anyone, it is essential to incorporate this ethics, how, in your vision, businesses can do that with the support of law or not, and how they're doing it today?
Okay, before answering, I would like to welcome to Turkey, because in Turkey we recently just talked, let's say, the beginning of artificial intelligence, and today we are going to talk about, and talking already, about ethics and artificial intelligence. So it's somehow more advanced. But being in the technology market for so many years, what I can say is, so we always told to our customers, technology is going to shape the way that you are going to do business and how you are going to competing, and as well how you are going to become disruptive. And all of the companies invested big time into technology. But the problem has been, again last year, very fresh data, $1.3 trillion has been invested into IT for digital transformation, and $900 billion was again waste of money last year. And the companies are trying to find a way to go through the digital transformation path. And now there is artificial intelligence, and it's no more a hype, and it's the most ever disruptive technology which technology companies are introducing. So we all know, as you have been mentioning, all companies, Google, Microsoft, including us, are betting heavily on it, and not only companies, even countries are betting on it. So when we talk about ethics and how artificial intelligence is going to change the environment, and please correct me, the way I define ethics is the following. First, there needs to be moral. So moral is right or wrong. Then ethics is, ethics should be there if we are 100% aware about what we are doing, and if we learn through experience. And then we start talking about artificial intelligence. When it comes to super artificial intelligence, it will be aware and it will learn from experiences. Today, only animals learn from experiences, but we as humans are aware about our pains, about our, let's say, dreams, or about everything what's going on, about the actions that we are doing. Having said all this, ethics, again, I want to repeat and kind of add on what you want to say, then I will talk about the businesses. Ethics is not like you are not allowed to do, it's not laws, no, this is wrong, this is, no, you should not be doing this. No, these are not the set of ethics what we are talking. Ethics is there in technology just so that the technology can work for the wealth of the people. I don't know if you are understanding me. It needs to flourish people. It needs to increase our living standards. It should not be worked in the different way. So as a result, so when it comes all this ethics and AI, the development of AI is watched carefully, not by us, but as well by the employees of the companies who are developing it. For example, as you have been mentioning, there have been like many protests in Google because employees were not happy with the contract which has been signed in defense industry. And then Google has to step back, otherwise it understood that it's going to lose its employees, and then has come up with 7 principles, plus 4 more principles where they say this is how we are going to work from now on. So things are like we are no more going to invest into defense, etc. are in the summary, and you can find all of them in their website. The same thing happened with Amazon, where their face recognition software has been sold to military. Computer vision, so they can simply identify on any picture whether there is a watch, there is something which has to do with, let's say, fashion. If they can understand the type of flower, so they've been working. And one day, the CEO of this company told the employees, "Hey, look, we are going to work with the military, and we are going to help them to develop autonomous, how would you say autonomous war machines." The first reaction of the employees were, no, we are not accepting this. We will not be involved as employees of this company in that kind of stuff. And there have been huge protests, and employees started leaving the company, one after another. And then the CEO, in order to stop, organized a big meeting with all the employees and told the employees, look, why we are developing all these autonomous war machines or let's say recognition systems, drones, etc. is if we develop and if we do it really perfect, then the civilians will not be killed. Only the soldier will be killed. So the employees were, are you kidding us? No. And then the CEO has been enforced to announce a declaration all through the company. And the lawyer, unfortunately, has written up all the ethics, but it was so obvious that she has been enforced by the CEO, and after she announced it, she left the company as well. So my point is the following: if there are no ethics in artificial intelligence, even the company's employees don't want to work for this company. So it really needs to develop. And so I want to talk about what is defined under ethics and what do we do in UiPath, but maybe it might be the next step. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to, I'll take the chance then to go quickly back to the general topics of ethics. Is this not working? Yeah. Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
Hanımefendinin çalışmıyormuş galiba.
Maybe slightly. Okay, well, as long as you guys can hear me and the camera. Maybe this is too much now. All right. So just going back to this, just like in any other problem, obviously, when you increase the accuracy and you get the right decisions, you're constantly asking questions. As in, when you think of automated war machines, it sounds like world destructions and the Terminator scenario all over again, right? But obviously, even in the defense industry, the applications can be intended, at least, in making the decisions, and it can be a lethal decisions, but for the common good, it's saving thousands of lives, and we're posing very deep and tough questions. Now, less tough but equally deep can be questions such as, am I altering the health insurance premium of this individual based on a set of wrong diagnoses that were AI generated by X-ray computer vision? And like, oh, wait a minute, so they're all discussed in the same ethical conversation on how do we establish what is right and what is wrong. We had the kind of, in the Google specifics, for instance, it wasn't, I think, I'm not involved, so I wouldn't know any more than what you can see on the newspapers, but I think that the conversation was about whether or not having a contract in defense and with what kind of specifics. So that alone obviously generates the conversation. So to your point, it's very important for the employees to be aligned on culture and values, and it caused companies like Google to take a step back and go, are we thinking about this well enough? Maybe we need some external help as well. Maybe we need some internal policies, etc. So it generated the whole conversation. Now, in defense of Google as well, years before, there were already initial robotics ethical committees started inside the company to try to define what would be the right ways to develop robotics and artificial intelligence. So it's all extremely interesting, and it goes under that definition of ethics. I think what you mean when you go, it's not law, it's not enforcement, it's the overall reasoning of how do we end thinking about right and wrong, and how do we decide what is right and wrong.
So I think it's, can you turn the volume on? I think you might want to distinguish kind of a macroethics from a microethics, because what you're talking about with Google and the other examples at the corporate level are about what is the culture of the company. And I think without generalizing too much, you have a relatively liberal kind of employee corpus in this company that doesn't really want to support war full stop. So it's not like Project Maven is not so much about using the technology to improve war, because they would rather not contribute to war full stop. But then when you go down to the micro level, actually you then start to say, well, we can have better object recognition, so we can minimize non-combatant death, and that's kind of the fundamental principle of international humanitarian law, which is that you minimize civilian death, because there are laws of war. It's to make war more, lawful in some way. So I think it's useful when we have the ethical conversation to distinguish the macroethics of do we even want this technology to get involved with war? Do we as a company want to do that? And those are macro questions. And then there's the micro design questions, which is, well, if we are going to use it, then how do we design it? And those can be questions like what data is used, how is the data labeled, how can we prevent discrimination based on protected characteristics, et cetera, et cetera. But those are all micro questions.
Our today's session is about artificial intelligence in finance and AI, and ethics, yes? So I want to give a little bit data about artificial intelligence, if you don't mind, how things are moving. So this year, artificial intelligence worldwide market is expected to be around last year it was $6 billion, and in 2021, it's expected to be $30 billion, and it's moving very fast, okay? But the thing is, banks have been always at the front, together with the insurance companies, to have artificial intelligence in their companies. And some recent survey results show that, one is from DBR Research, 48% of banks with more than 50 billion in the assets have deployed artificial intelligence solution. So 48% of the top banks have deployed. The smaller ones, not yet, because they're waiting. They're a little bit more conservative. So actually, didn't we meet already, as you have been saying at the beginning, with how we call them, robot advisor who are asking us that we use on our mobile phones. The other thing was, again, a very recent survey from Deloitte found out that 17% of global executives are ready to manage people, robots, and AI. Only 17% of the CEOs are ready. So they don't know how to manage things, okay? Then another one, very recent, 2018, where 40% of surveyed executives, like 1,400, expect artificial intelligence imitate human behavior, and they want to fully rely on artificial intelligence for their bank operations. Then the last one being 32% of respondents of 1,400 executives ranked ethical issues of AI one of the top risks for their companies. Okay, what they mean? Let me tell you a little bit more. There are a few things within the finance area. First of all, consumer privacy. What if the consumer one day comes and complain about the privacy? Because a bank today knows at what time, at what particular shop or restaurant or whatever, we spend some money. At what time they can get even our location because of we have been there. So they're collecting, just because we let them to do so, tremendous amount of data about us. So if we apply for a loan, we again give tremendous amount of data about us. There is one application in China I love it, and I keep repeating it maybe in many events, but I just want to again repeat here. This application, mobile application, gives to 97%, gives loan up to $500 to any Chinese person who applies on the mobile phone, up to $500. And 97% of this loan is paid back. Amazing ratio, 97%. You know how it goes? The moment the Chinese person starts entering the data, so name, surname, it first measures what kind of speed is used in entering the data, how much the person is willing. Then looks at the date, when the date is, what time of the date the data is entered. Is it before salary is paid or is it after salary is paid? And then it starts looking at what is the mobile phone model, which year, what is the capacity, how much battery percentage is left. So who are in the contacts, who are in his or in her LinkedIn contacts, who are in his or her Facebook contacts, in social media contacts. Is there any application like Bitcoin or cryptocurrency? Is there any gamble software? And then immediately displays, okay, you know you are entitled to a $500 loan, and you can go and use with the bank that you have agreed. It's an amazing technology, but can you imagine how much data is left behind by the consumer who applies for this one? So who's responsible for this data? Can it be used in a bad way? The second thing is explainability. So we call it explainable artificial intelligence, which means how does this machine decide on me how I'm going to get, or I'm entitled to have a loan. If this machine is not deciding in a right way, it's going to damage maybe my family life, my business life. So can anybody tell me and explain what is it? And you know what is the problem? All the banks, when they develop the artificial intelligence software, they are very proud with it, and they don't want to disclose how the algorithm is working. So they don't let anybody to look at it. But actually it needs to be looked at by a third party. So you have been mentioning at the beginning, like Google got in agreement with an external party to observe how they are developing AI, and that's the reason why. And it's a very recent news. So nobody is regulating ethics, unfortunately, for the moment.
If I can step just
Please.
for 1 second there. You
Sure.
touched on two important points,
Yeah.
which is data and the transparency of the AI reasoning. And I think Nikita can also share a bit of research around that, because right now, so first of all, AI is not conditional programming. It's not an if and then. So if this parameter is X, then do this other thing. The reality is that it's not only about companies that want to keep this or that secret, but there is non-transparent AI, as in machines are learning and they're applying decisions based on that learning. You don't actually know how and why. One example, the AlphaGo experiment. So having or chess, relying on historical data means, let me have a look at all of the chess games of history and I learn how to play chess. This is what the machine does. But another way is, let me play against myself, and I play a lot of games and I learn by playing. And this is synthetic data. It's not historical. It's created by the machine itself. It doesn't look at any chess game. It's just playing and learns by playing with itself. And in a few hours, it can actually play more games than it was ever played by humanity in the whole history of mankind. And it learns by itself. There's a book written by a couple of major chess players that they actually analyzed thousands of records of these games. And they define it like this. They said, it's like reading the notebooks of a great chess player. You don't know how the machine made those decisions. You actually try to understand what the machine thought by looking at the games. You're inside a simulation of a human brain. There is no rules. You don't know how it came up with that level of learning, and it became an amazing player. So maybe you want to share something around this, Nikita. I'm sorry, I'm probably spending too much time, but there's the transparency and there's the data. And can we apply equally good decisions on approving or not a mortgage on data that is not historical, so we're not touching the person's privacy, for example? Or how transparent is the machine by the nature of being intelligent, because there's no rules. So we actually need to teach the machine how to think ethically, because we won't be able to impose any rule. That's why we say ethics is not legal enforcement, or not only, it's not imposing something, because the machine is coming with its own thinking, so we need to make sure that it thinks ethically. I don't know if you can share something that we'll get back to the business part.
And can I ask one more thing? I want to add on this one. This Australian bank, West Bank Banking Corporation, is currently trying an artificial intelligence powered video cameras to read the mood of the staff and report back to the managers. So with the cameras, how the staff is working. Again, is this one like ethical?
I mean, so there's a lot there. I think there's a kind of a big discussion around explainability in AI. It's not a new conversation. XAI has sort of existed as a field of interest for some time. It's intuitively appealing to want to explain how machines are making decisions. As humans, we want to be able to understand, and the more we delegate responsibility to something that doesn't look like us, or doesn't think like us, the more skeptical we tend to become. So it's been a burgeoning field of research. I think that the reality, though, is that part of it is just sort of kind of curiosity to understand why are these decisions being taken, because in practice, you can regulate based on effects as well, and a lot of legal systems are designed to remedy bad effects. So the question is whether there is so much risk of something going wrong that we can't wait to see what the outcome is, that we need to intervene before that. And that is a real risk. So for example, if a system is making decisions based on biases in the data that only it sees because the data is highly structured and unstructured and high dimensional, and so we can't really interpret it. And then the outcome's really bad, but there's a lag because there's, over a course of 10 years, there's been systematic discrimination against a particular race or a particular gender, but we'd only know that in 10 years' time, then we might not want to wait till the outcomes and the effects. We might want to intervene earlier on. But I don't think that explainability in itself should be the objective, and that there are ways to go around that. And similarly, it's not that we need to be asking the system for an explanation, but we are asking people who manage it to be able to explain it. And so it's a kind of, the emphasis should be on those who are operating those systems. In terms of using synthetic data and self-learning in financial services, or for example, credit decision making, I think so. Synthetic data is or advances in the use of synthetic data for AI is really significant because it has a potentially big privacy advantage if we can avoid using real personal data, and potentially also increases the efficiency of data use, which has advantages from a environmental and resource perspective. I think the challenge is that using synthetic data is very doable and effective in highly structured and predictable environments, like a game of chess. Right? But the more real world the situation becomes, the less predictable it becomes, because as humans, we're kind of really unpredictable and quite chaotic. So it's not possible, people have been trying to do this for centuries. We can't really predict and model our behavior in a very, very clean and perfect scientific way, in the way that you can start to predict the game of chess if you have enough, if you go through enough permutations of that game, right? So my question then would be, how much can you rely on synthetic data to predict how humans are going to behave? And that kind of leads me to my bigger picture view on the role of AI in more kind of human endeavors, is that it's going to be difficult to fully replace human judgment and human interpretation, even if that role might be reduced. So you can predict quite a bit, but there will be some things that will require human judgment at that point, and it's because the world is not a game of chess.
Right.
Yeah, and I would call this as another item called accuracy. So at the end of the day, the human has to be the last decision maker until AI develops. And when I say until AI develops, we don't expect AI to make judgment better than us, not my opinion, but before 2050. So we have like 30 years to go. We are still at the beginning. So this is, by the way, the general time about which all the futurists agree. Okay?
So I think we're mixing two things, because I think the 2050 is a sort of singularity kind of hypothesis of, well, you'll have this artificial super intelligence that could kind of reprogram itself and basically could just turn on us as humans. And that's a hypothesis. It may or may not come true, and the timeline might be different. it's open to debate. But then the other sort of parallel question which you touched on is, will computers think better than us? Well, in many domains they already do, right? So it's a narrow AI and it's artificial specific intelligence as opposed to the singularity, which is about general AI, artificial general intelligence. But if we say, do computers think better than humans? Well, in the game of chess, apparently they do, and in many other respects as well.
Yeah.
The thing is, the human component is not replaceable, or we don't wish to replace it. And we go back to the initial thing, like you can become closer to the machine or the machine closer to human. So as of today, to have artificial intelligence solving problems for us, we do what we call enveloping. So we enclose the problem, changing the interface. So you wouldn't expect a machine to cook exactly like you do. It will still make, I don't know, whatever, pizza for you, but it will do it in a different way. So we create an environment and tools and an oven, etc., for a machine to cook pizza, and be very creative about it, and maybe invent new ways of creating pizza. So it's not simple algorithm, put the cheese, put tomato. You can see the Italian in me coming out, right? But it's actually learning new things. But we created an environment that is good for that artificial intelligence. And now we need to make sure that we create the right environments. The risk there is that we get closer to the machine thinking in a way, and we use that inputs that we need to create an ethical environment around it, which I believe is the real challenge. There was another point that I have forgotten now, but it will come back to mind.
Okay. So shall I talk from UiPath perspective? So as you asked already. So what we do in UiPath is we do narrow AI, first of all. So we do mainly computer vision, we do mainly voice recognition, we do mainly document recognition, and we automate everything what you do on computer. You know, since I joined this company, I would never guess that that kind of a technology exists. But it's mind-blowing. Instead of you sitting in front of the computer, a virtual robot is sitting and as if they're typing, and then something is appearing on the screen. So when you issue in British consulate the visas, there are no persons, really somebody opening the applications, and you see it live. That's amazing, okay? But there is one ethical issue which we are addressing, which is workforce management. So whenever I explain this technology to any CEO or C-level person, they immediately ask, I can fire people. I say, no, forget firing about the people. Technology is here to help you so that your employees can develop themselves and you can invest them for their development, plus their satisfaction is going to increase. And when their satisfaction is going to increase, then customer satisfaction is going to increase. Let me tell you, I mean, there are some Turkish people even in this room, and it happens everywhere, but here in Turkey, we kind of more or less, advanced for the last years, not as compared to your countries, in terms of e-governments. So we used to go to all these, let's say, governmental institutions to get a paper, whatever it is. And so, I mean, like 1 month ago, I went to Beykoz tax office, and I was amazed. Everybody was trying and asking me, how can I help you, sir? How can I help you, sir? How can I help you, sir? And when I went out of the tax office, I really gave a call to our Ankara ministry and thanking them for the great thing that they have done. And the answer was, we automated, yes, but we as well put lots of effort on our employees. That's amazing. Let me give you a few numbers. As of today, 28% of our job is done by robots. 28%. If we go to 2025, 52% of the jobs will be done by robots. Are we losing the jobs? No. The near future, 2020, there will be 130 million new jobs, okay? 130 million new net jobs worldwide in 2020. 70 million will be taken by robots. There is 60 million left. 60 million will be taken by humans. But stop, there is a problem. 54% of these jobs cannot be done if we continue with this education level. So everybody needs to be ready for 2022's new jobs. Like remaining, let's say, out of this 54%, 46% can be done with the current education system. But the remaining 56, for the remaining 56, if we zoom into this 56, 35% of this 56 needs minimum 6 months of education for the people to take over. And then the remaining 9 needs 12 months, and the remaining needs 10% needs more than 1 year. Guess what? If, for example, we, as in Turkey right now, we are in Turkey, if the Turkish government is not preparing us for this future, all these jobs will move to UK or to Italy, maybe, in case your governments do the same thing. So as a result, worldwide, it's number one responsibility of the governments, of the companies, to educate and to train their employees or citizens constantly to prepare for this future. And when according to the McKinsey again, Accenture research, very recent one, in 2030, in business life, we will need people. When I ask what kind of people we need, your answer might be, hey, there will be robots and so on. So we will need people who can communicate, who is very strong in communication, empathy, who understands each other. No, the answer is not that. The answer is still, we need very strong analytical people, because robotics and artificial intelligence is going to be still developed and is more getting into mature. And as you said, when we go to singularity, the government has to as well start thinking about it, about the basic income, how to spread the wealth, about the insurance, etc. So what we do constantly, again, coming back to this one, is we announce one after another results of the research, and we are going to announce this month another one, but how the future of work is going to be shaped. And last week, I was in our Turkish Davos with many CEOs in the room. I had 5-minute speech, and like most of the speech was about, if you invest into digital transformation, stop thinking about firing your employees. This is not going to help your companies, this is not going to help our nation. You have to educate and train your employees for the wealth of the nation, and this is what technology is helping you.
And the reality is that work changes, that you need to train and have your employees growing in all cases. So now this is a different set of reasons why. Now we're reaching almost the end time, and I know that we started a bit late, but I don't know how much flexibility we have. We don't want to be disruptive to the next panel. We promised we had a bit of a conversation, so we have a few minutes for you guys to ask questions or join somehow until they kick us out, essentially. Anyone to be interested? Okay. Thanks.
Ethics and culture. I think to me that's, if you understand the level of technology of AI, how do you apply that to different cultures, which is then an overlay, I guess, of ethics and culture.
I think you should speak about this one.
Yeah,
Because we have been talking just before.
Yeah, no, so it's a really interesting question. I'm doing a lot of work on intercultural digital ethics, which is exactly what you're asking about. And I mean, that's exactly right, that every culture or many cultures have different ethics and different values. And obviously, technological design needs to be sensitive to that cultural relativity. And quite frankly, the conversation on that is not particularly developed right now. And one of the objectives that I have in the sort of work that I'm doing at the OII is to increase that conversation. And part of it is really like making sure that the people design, so it comes back to the people and the entities that are involved in conceiving and developing that technology, and that those groups are diverse and represent and reflect a variety of cultural and ethical standpoints. And I think that's a really key ingredient to achieving that kind of diversity in the technology itself. But some things will need to be specific to different cultures, not least that each country has different sort of etiquette of the roads, and so a self-driving car will need to have software that programs, much in the way that the GPS or the maps rather are different for different countries, and you have different software. In a similar way, you would need to have some kind of country-specific application. But at the same time, at the development stage, we can have a much more intercultural dialogue to address exactly the problem that you describe.
There are some moral problems that seem to change according to culture, and some moral rules that seem to stay the same across all cultures. And there's actually studies of meta-ethics, if you wish, that are trying to understand how do we determine these moral values
Yeah.
and how culture is involved?
Well,
So
actually,
it's
like
a
on the
dynamic.
Hansi, you brought up the point about privacy, and or
Yeah.
you brought up an example of China,
Yeah, yeah.
right? And there's like a lot being written and discussed in Western media, particularly about social credit scoring, and everyone has heard of this. And we're kind of really, aghast that this massive invasion of privacy is taking place. Like everything you do is being recorded, and you're being scored, and so on. I'm anecdotally and at sort of a very high level, I don't think the reaction is exactly the same in China, and that you can debate reasons why, of course. But they also, part of the reason is that they have a different conception of privacy, different expectation of privacy. At the very least, we could talk about sort of Western broadly defined ethics as being much more individualist, or much more focused on the individual and our right of identity and self-determination in a kind of Kantian sense. And then you have Eastern broadly defined ethics that are much more communal. They're much more about group ethics. They're more likely to want to know your family's consent to a decision about using your data than your individual consent. And that's a very different perspective, and it leads to a very different view on privacy.
Yeah.
You could argue that southern Italy is the same.
Right. Yeah, I always thought that Italians and Indians were the same. So.
It's true. Like
Yeah, but just because of it, so we technology companies think that China is going to advance in the consumer AI much further than any other country, and I think they're already doing.
Well, and so the argument there is that, well, and this could be a cynical or like sort of a positive argument, is that, well, they're going to advance further because people don't care about their data being used, and that might or might not be accurate, but certainly the way that data is being collected, and to the extent data is the main ingredient of machine learning systems, it might suggest that.
There's been historically a differently culturally defined view of privacy, even between the United States and Europe,
Of
and
course.
GDPR being
Different
run in
history.
Europe, and so the question on interculture is a complex and open one, that's for sure. There's a lot of studies going on around it. Anything else before we? Yeah. Okay.
As for the transparency of the algorithms, that they cannot be well audited, the reasoning process, etc. Going through the way of duality of natural intelligence and artificial intelligence. As for the natural intelligence, the reasoning process is not transparent at all, actually. But we have the real personal identity, being a human, a person, and we have the reputation of it, actually, of him or her, actually. But as for are there such a notion of algorithmic identity or the reputation of an algorithm in a world where every day the developers are catching the algorithm? This is a discrete learning curve for an algorithmic identity. Humans are not patched, actually, they are just learning. Are there such questions within your realm, actually?
I mean, I'm happy to, I think that's
an extensive question, I know.
No, it's a really interesting question. I mean, the first thing that came to mind is this brilliant book called We Are Data by a guy called John Cheney-Lippold, and he's talking about exactly that we have these data selves, this kind of parallel personality or identity that is based on our data and that is being manipulated by a bunch of mathematical models, and it could reflect our actual physical real world identity, but there could also be massive gaps and massive inaccuracies. And one of the challenges as we move into a more algorithmic, more data-driven existence or society is to ensure that there aren't massive gaps between real world and artificial identity. On the other hand, you could argue that having this ability to escape your real world identity is actually a positive thing. Say you are fleeing persecution and that your real world identity makes you singled out for persecution. Being able to leave that and being able to recreate your identity in a new place without having those factors, say it's your race or your particular community, attached to you, would be positive from a kind of human security perspective, right? So there's two sides, I think, to this algorithmic identity, but I think it's like a really interesting debate.
Thank you very much for this very inspiring discussion. One question I have in mind is, what about the accountability? I mean, in the environment where decisions are taken by machines or people, and there's a consequences, if there's something wrong, how can you keep this accountable for the machine?
I would say accountability is one of the major components of this code of ethics. So it needs to be very well defined. So as you are asking very rightfully, so who is responsible? Will the company say or the bank say, no, this was my system? No, I mean, you are responsible at the end of the day. And you have to define who's accountable, and you have to accept the charges or penalties in case something goes wrong. But again, it needs to be defined. But I don't know if you are all understanding, still in my opinion, the ethics and the code of ethics of artificial intelligence is different from one country to another country. And European Union is right now have come up with like 5 items, and one of them is accountability, and they expect a definition. It's still progressing, and it's definitely something that needs to be in the radar.
If I could just quickly add that, like, one way to obviously define accountability is legal liability, so who is going to take legal responsibility. And there is a debate, of course, around how liability changes as processes become more automated. I don't think that the problem is insurmountable, because since we're not in a world of fully autonomous robots kind of running entirely by themselves, there will probably be a company or a human, i.e. legally responsible people, somewhere nearby. And the question is who takes that responsibility and how it's distributed. So one of the big challenges in ethics and law is like how to distribute liability and how to distribute morality. But certainly, you know, if we take product liability as an example, we've already had many examples of liability being attributed to the manufacturer of, say, they make a toy and a child gets injured. In many countries, or at least in the UK, that liability regime has become what we call strict liability. So we don't care who is at fault, but we're going to make you the manufacturer and therefore your insurer liable. And it could be, and at least we're seeing, for example, with self-driving cars, they have a bill in Parliament which, unfortunately, because of Brexit, has kind of just sort of languished. But the idea is to attribute liability for accidents up to a certain level, where there's a certain level of autonomy in the car, to the manufacturer.
Just to wrap it up, because we don't want to be again too disruptive for the next panel, just a couple of quick points, and then we'll wrap it up. On the reputation, it's interesting to think about the reputation of an AI itself, and the MIT has been developing, for example, an artificial intelligence designed to spot and remove bias from other artificial intelligences. So you have one thing regulating the other, and then you could argue that you can have a number of AIs learning and trained on different aspects, analyzing and generating other AIs, and you start generating a reputation of an AI among other AIs, which is an interesting scenario. And the other thing about liability can be spread, again, as Nikita was saying, manufacturer, or the engineer, and again, you can have an AI spitting code and generating another piece of software, another AI. So the AI itself becomes responsible for a second level generation. So a manufacturer of an AI has created an AI that created another one, and the second one is responsible for a certain crime. How do you regulate that? So there's a set of interesting questions that generally are being researched. Well, thank you very much for your time today, and we'll be around for other questions and conversations for sure. Thank you.